The rain in the city didn't fall. It shattered. It bounced off the pavement in jagged shards, blurring the neon signs of the Koreatown district into a smear of pink and blue. Mitchell Porter wiped the visor of her helmet, her breath fogging the plastic. The timer on her handlebars was a digital heartbeat, pulsing red. 4:02 remaining. Come on, she hissed, weaving her bicycle between a stalled taxi and a steaming sewer grate. Mitchell wasn't just a delivery girl. She was a ghost in the machine of the city. She knew which alleys had loose gravel and which doors stayed propped open for smoke breaks. But as she banked into a narrow passage behind a row of high-end boutiques, her headlights swept over something that didn't belong. A splash of silver. A silk coat, pale as a pearl, lay crumpled against a stack of discarded pallets. Mitchell squeezed her brakes. The bike skidded, the metal frame groaning. She should keep going. Another late delivery meant another strike on her account, and 3 strikes meant no rent. But the way the figure was slumped, too still, too heavy, stopped her. She hopped off the bike and knelt in the mud. It was an elderly Korean woman. Her face was a terrifying shade of blue-gray, her throat working convulsively, but no air was going in. Next to her lay a dropped bag of groceries, a jar of honey, a box of walnuts, and a broken container of shrimp paste. Anaphylaxis, Mitchell whispered, her nursing textbooks flashing in her mind. She checked the woman's pulse, thready and racing. The woman's eyes rolled back, her hand clutching weakly at Mitchell's damp hoodie. Mitchell reached into the hidden pocket of her delivery bag. Her fingers closed around the plastic tube of her generic EpiPen. She hesitated for a fraction of a second. This was her emergency-only lifeline, a $150 investment she had worked 20 extra shifts to afford. If she used it now, she'd be walking a tightrope without a net for the rest of the month. The woman's chest hitched in a final, desperate gasp. "Damn it," Mitchell cursed. She ripped off the blue safety cap. "Sorry about the bruise, ma'am." She slammed the injector into the woman's outer thigh. 1, 2, 3. A sharp, mechanical click echoed in the alley. Mitchell held it steady, watching. Slowly, the woman's throat relaxed. A ragged, whistling breath escaped her lips, followed by a deeper, life-giving gulp of air. Mitchell didn't wait for a thank you. She grabbed her phone and dialed 911, barking the exact coordinates of the alley entrance. In the distance, the low growl of heavy engines approached, not the high-pitched wail of an ambulance, but the synchronized hum of black SUVs. Fear, cold and sharp, spiked in Mitchell's gut. This neighborhood belonged to the Iron Pine Syndicate, and she was a black girl in a hoodie standing over a collapsed woman in a dark alley. The optics were a death sentence. She leapt back onto her bike just as the glare of high-beam headlights hit the brick walls behind her. "Stay with the light, ma'am," Mitchell whispered. She pedaled into the shadows, her heart hammering harder than the rain. She had saved a life, lost her on-time bonus, and used her only medical safety net. By the time the heavy doors of the SUVs opened and a dozen men in dark suits spilled out, Mitchell Porter was already a mile away, lost in the gray veins of the city. She didn't know that the woman she had just saved was the only person in the world who could make Baek Seung-min, the city's most feared man, bleed. And she certainly didn't know that she had left her delivery receipt with her full name and phone number right next to the empty EpiPen. The next morning, the adrenaline had curdled into a cold, sinking dread. Mitchell sat at her kitchen table staring at her phone. The delivery app showed a bright red notification. Account flagged, incomplete delivery. "Great," she muttered, rubbing her eyes. "Saved a life, lost $20, and my pro status." She checked her bank account. $42.18. Her generic EpiPen had cost $145. Replacing it was out of the question until next month, leaving her vulnerable every time she passed a seafood restaurant. When she stepped outside to start her shift, she froze. Her old rattling bicycle, the one with the rusted chain and the wobbly seat, was gone. In its place, chained with a heavy-duty titanium lock, was a matte black V-Power electric cargo bike. It was a top-of-the-line machine, the kind that cost more than her tuition. Taped to the handlebars was a small, cream-colored envelope. Inside was no name, only a handwritten note in elegant, sharp script. A debt of blood is not paid in copper. Your old vehicle was insufficient for your speed. Mitchell's heart hammered against her ribs. She looked up and down her street, suddenly feeling exposed. "Who is watching me?" she whispered. She tried to go about her day, but the city felt different. When she went to her local bodega to buy a coffee, the owner, a man who usually grunted at her, shook his head when she pulled out her wallet. "Paid for," he said, pointing to a black SUV idling at the curb. "Everything you want in here for a month. Already settled." Mitchell didn't feel lucky. She felt hunted. By noon, she realized she was being trailed. A silver sedan followed her through 3 different zip codes, always keeping exactly 2 car lengths behind. The climax of her paranoia came during a delivery to a quiet corporate park. As she handed a bag of takeout to a receptionist, 2 men in tailored charcoal suits stepped out of the elevator. They didn't look like office workers. They had the thick necks and scarred knuckles of men who handled violence for a living. "Miss Mitchell Porter?" asked the taller one. His voice was polite, but his eyes were like flint. Mitchell gripped the handles of her new bike. "I don't want the bike. Take it back. I don't want the coffee either. The chairman wishes to thank you in person, and Baek Seung-min does not like to be kept waiting." Mitchell looked at the exit, then at the 2 men. She was a runner, but she knew she couldn't outrun the kind of power that could buy her life before she even woke up. She stepped into the elevator, the scent of expensive cologne and ozone filling the small space as the doors hissed shut. The elevator didn't just go up. It felt like it was leaving the earth. Mitchell watched the floor numbers climb into the 50s. She caught her reflection in the polished steel doors, a girl in a salt-stained hoodie and worn sneakers, looking like a glitch in a world of glass and marble. The doors opened into a sprawling office that felt more like a command center. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a predatory view of the city skyline. At the far end of the room, behind a desk carved from a single slab of obsidian, sat Baek Seung-min. He didn't look like the movie version of a mobster. He wore a charcoal turtleneck and wire-rimmed glasses, looking more like a tech CEO than a killer. But when he looked up, Mitchell felt the air leave the room. His eyes were cold, calculating, and heavy with a weary kind of power. "Sit," he said. It wasn't a request. Mitchell stayed standing. "I'm late for a delivery. Just tell me why I'm here so I can go." Seung-min leaned back, a flicker of something, perhaps amusement, crossing his face. He slid a thick manila folder across the desk. It was open. Mitchell saw her own face staring back at her, her high school transcripts, her mother's death certificate, her current bank balance. "You used a generic epinephrine auto-injector on my mother. It had an expiration date of 6 months ago. You are a pre-nursing student with a 3.8 GPA, yet you cannot afford a fresh prescription." "Is there a point to this?" Mitchell snapped, her fear turning into defensive anger. "Or do you just like stalking people you're thanking?" "The point," Seung-min said, standing up, "is that you are a variable I didn't account for. My mother is alive because of a girl who has every reason to hate people like me. In my world, a life debt is not a suggestion. It is a weight that must be balanced." He gestured to a leather briefcase on the desk. "There is $50,000 in there. It covers your tuition, your medical supplies, and your time. Take it, and we are even." Mitchell looked at the briefcase, then back at the man who had her entire life documented in a folder. She thought about the generic EpiPen, the long shifts, and the way the city chewed people up. "No," she said. The silence that followed was deafening. Even the guards by the door seemed to stop breathing. Seung-min narrowed his eyes. "No?" I didn't save her because she was your mother, Mitchell said, her voice trembling but firm. I saved her because she was an old lady dying in the rain. If I take that money, I'm just another person on your payroll. I'm not for sale. She turned to leave, her heart hammering. She expected the guards to block her, but Seung-min raised a hand. You think you're keeping your hands clean, Mitchell Porter, Seung-min called out as she reached the door. But my mother already knows your name, and she is far more stubborn than I am. You saved her life, now you have to deal with her. Mitchell didn't look back. She rushed into the elevator, but as the doors closed, she realized she had made a terrible mistake. She hadn't ended the connection. She had piqued the interest of a man who never let anything go. 2 days passed, and Mitchell tried to sink back into the anonymity of the city. But the black electric bike remained in her hallway, a silent, expensive reminder that she was on the radar of a predator. The order came at 6 p.m. on a Tuesday. Mitchell's phone buzzed with a delivery request that bypassed the usual app interface. The screen simply displayed a gold-embossed address in the Heights and a short note, Shrimp-free mandu, 7 p.m., do not be late. When Mitchell arrived at the high-rise, a glass fortress with more security than a bank, she wasn't met by a receptionist. A driver she recognized from Seung-min's office escorted her directly to the penthouse. The doors opened to a space that smelled of sesame oil and expensive lilies. There was no mafia boss in sight. Instead, Mrs. Baek sat at a low table by a window, her pale silk robe shimmering in the sunset. She looked frail, but had eyes as sharp as her son's. Sit, Mrs. Baek said in Korean, gesturing to the cushion across from her. When Mitchell hesitated, the older woman tapped the table impatiently. Sit, eat. I'm just the delivery girl, ma'am, Mitchell said, though she sat. Mrs. Baek ignored her. She reached out and grabbed Mitchell's hand, her skin like parchment, but her grip surprisingly strong. She spoke again, and this time a young man in a suit, a translator who looked terrified of the old woman, stepped forward. The chairman says your hands are steady. She says my son is a fool who tries to pay for a soul with paper money. She says she wants to see the girl who didn't run when the Reaper came. For the next hour, Mitchell didn't deliver food, she shared it. Mrs. Baek insisted Mitchell taste every dish, watching her with a terrifyingly maternal gaze. Through the translator, Mrs. Baek asked about Mitchell's mother, her studies, and her brave, tired heart. It was a strange, golden hour of peace, but it was shattered when the heavy front door swung open. Baek Seung-min walked in, surrounded by his usual wall of charcoal suits. He stopped, his eyes flicking from his mother's smiling face to Mitchell's defensive posture. "Mother," Baek Seung-min said, his voice dropping an octave. Mrs. Baek barked something back in rapid-fire Korean that made the guards look at their shoes. "The chairman says," the translator stammered, "that since you are too clumsy to thank the girl properly, she will do it herself. She has decided Mitchell is to be her special courier. Every day, same time." Seung-min looked at Mitchell. For the first time, he didn't look like a boss. He looked like a frustrated son. "You don't have to do this," he told Mitchell. Mitchell looked at Mrs. Baek, who was currently tucking a piece of beef into a lettuce wrap to hand her. She looked at the old woman's leg, where a faint bruise from the EpiPen still lingered. It's better than the app, and she's the only person in this city who actually says please before she tells me what to do. As Mitchell left that night, she passed a group of guards in the hallway. One of them, a man with a jagged scar across his nose named Lieutenant Park, didn't bow. He watched Mitchell with a look of pure, concentrated venom. Mitchell realized then that being the lucky charm of a mafia queen wasn't just a job. It was a position in a hierarchy she didn't understand, and one that people were willing to kill for. Over the next few weeks, Mitchell became a fixture in the Baek penthouse. She wasn't a servant, and she wasn't a friend. She was something in between. She brought Mrs. Baek food from the hidden corners of the city, and in exchange, the chairman's mother taught Mitchell how to play hatu, flower cards, and yelled at her when her posture was bad. But Mitchell was observant. Being a delivery girl had trained her to see the things people tried to hide. She noticed the way Lieutenant Park, Seung-min's second-in-command, looked at the chairman. It wasn't loyalty, it was hunger. One evening, while Mitchell was retrieving her thermal bag from the kitchen, she took a wrong turn into a secondary hallway. She heard voices coming from the glass-walled balcony. "The chairman is distracted," a voice hissed. It was Park. "He spends his evenings worrying about his mother's diet and a girl from the streets. The Japanese are moving on the docks, and he's playing house." "He's sentimental," another man replied. "Sentimental men get buried." Mitchell froze, her back pressed against the cold marble wall. "We don't need to bury him yet," Park said, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous silk. "We just need to show him he can't protect what he loves. If the mother disappears, Seung-min will burn the city down looking for her. In the chaos, we take the seat." Mitchell's blood turned to ice. She realized she wasn't just a guest anymore. She was a witness. She tried to slip away, but her sneaker squeaked against the polished floor. The voices on the balcony stopped instantly. Mitchell didn't wait. She ducked into the laundry room, heart hammering against her ribs. Seconds later, heavy footsteps passed the door. She held her breath until the footsteps faded, but she knew the clock had started. She had to tell Seung-min, but as she looked through the cracked door, she saw Seung-min entering the living room, looking exhausted. Behind him, standing like a loyal shadow, was Lieutenant Park, smiling as he took the chairman's coat. The air in the penthouse felt heavy, like the static before a lightning strike. Mitchell arrived at 6:30 p.m. with a bag of spicy rice cakes from a street vendor Mrs. Baek loved. She had intended to pull Seung-min aside and warn him about Lieutenant Park, but the chairman wasn't there. He had been called away to an emergency meeting at the docks, a meeting Mitchell now realized was almost certainly a setup. "Eat, eat," Mrs. Baek insisted, waving Mitchell toward the table. Mitchell sat, but she didn't open the food. She looked at the two guards standing by the balcony. They weren't the usual men. They were younger, with restless eyes and hands that stayed too close to their jackets. "Where's the translator?" Mitchell asked, her voice low. "He is unwell," one of the guards replied in a clipped English. Suddenly, the lights flickered and died. The massive floor-to-ceiling windows, which usually showcased the city's glow, became black mirrors. The electronic thunk of the heavy front door deadbolting echoed through the silent apartment. "They cut the power," Mitchell whispered. She felt Mrs. Baek's hand find hers in the dark. The old woman wasn't trembling. She was incredibly still. "Park," Mrs. Baek said. The name spat out like a curse. Even without a translator, the venom in her voice was clear. A red emergency light kicked on, bathing the room in a bloody hue. The two guards drew their weapons, but they didn't point them at the door. They pointed them at Mitchell and the old woman. "The chairman is dead or dying by now," the taller guard said. "You two are coming with us. Keep the old lady quiet, and maybe we won't have to hurt you, Porter." Mitchell's mind raced. They were on the 52nd floor. The elevators would be locked or controlled by Park's men. The main exit was blocked. She looked at her delivery bag sitting on the counter. Inside was her heavy-duty bike chain and a small canister of industrial-grade pepper spray she carried for late-night shifts in bad neighborhoods. "She needs her medicine," Mitchell said, her voice shaking, half from fear, half from a plan forming. "She's having a panic attack. If she dies here, you have no leverage." The guards hesitated. In their world, Mrs. Baek was a prize, not a person. "Fine, get it, fast." Mitchell moved to her bag, but she didn't grab medicine. She grabbed the pepper spray and the heavy steel U-lock. She looked at Mrs. Beck and gave a tiny, sharp nod toward the kitchen's service entrance. "Now!" Mitchell screamed. She spun, spraying a cloud of stinging orange mist directly into the guards' faces. As they roared in pain, clutching their eyes, Mitchell didn't try to fight them. She grabbed Mrs. Beck's arm and hauled her toward the small, inconspicuous door behind the pantry, the freight entrance used for laundry and trash. They stepped into the narrow, concrete service hallway just as the first gunshots shattered the glass of the dining table behind them. The service corridor was a brutal contrast to the penthouse. Gone were the marble floors and silk wallpapers, replaced by bare concrete and the hum of industrial ventilation. The air smelled of trash and laundry detergent. "Hurry, ma'am," Mitchell urged, supporting Mrs. Baek's weight. The older woman was breathing hard, her silk slippers slapping against the floor, but her jaw was set in a line of iron. Mitchell knew how these buildings worked. High-rises like this were like two different cities stacked on top of each other, the one the residents saw and the one the workers used. "The elevators are death traps," Mitchell whispered, more to herself than to Mrs. Baek. "They'll be waiting at the lobby." She led Mrs. Baek toward the trash chute room. Inside, there was a small, ancient service lift used by the janitorial staff. Mitchell punched the button, her heart hammering against her ribs. Nothing. The power cut had disabled it. "The stairs!" Mitchell groaned. 50 floors! It was impossible for Mrs. Baek. Suddenly, a heavy thud echoed from the door they had just exited. Park's men were through the pepper spray. They were coming. Mitchell looked around the small room, her eyes landing on a heavy steel laundry cart filled with used linens from the building's spa. A frantic, desperate idea took hold. "In!" Mitchell said, pointing at the cart. Mrs. Baek looked at the cart, then at Mitchell, and for a second, the chairman's mother looked ready to argue. Then, hearing the shouts of men in the hallway, she climbed in, burying herself under the white towels. Mitchell grabbed the handle and sprinted. She didn't go for the stairs. She went for the gravity-fed laundry chute, a wide, reinforced shaft used to drop linens directly to the basement laundry facility. It was a vertical drop, but it was padded. "Hold your breath," Mitchell cried. She shoved the cart toward the oversized chute opening. It was a tight fit, but the heavy-duty plastic wheels cleared the lip. She didn't watch the cart disappear. Instead, she turned and sprinted for the stairs. She was an athlete. She could do 50 floors down in record time. She just had to pray the cart hit the bottom softly enough and that she got to the basement before the traders did. As she flew down the concrete stairs, leaping 3 at a time, she heard the door above her burst open. "She's not here! Check the chutes!" a voice roared. Mitchell didn't stop. Her lungs burned, her vision blurred. She was Mitchell Porter, the girl who delivered in rain, snow, and heat. She was the only thing standing between a grandmother and a hit squad, and she wasn't going to miss this delivery. By the time she reached the P3 level, her legs felt like lead. She burst into the laundry room. The cart was there, overturned on a mountain of towels. "Ma'am," Mitchell gasped, pulling back the linens. Mrs. Baek emerged, covered in lint and looking absolutely furious, but alive. She stood up, straightened her robe, and looked at Mitchell. "Fast," the old woman said in English. A small, grim smile touched her lips. "Beyond fast," Mitchell replied, grabbing the woman's hand. "Now we just have to get to my bike." The basement garage was a forest of concrete pillars and idling engines. Mitchell could hear the elevator chimes echoing through the shafts. Park's men were hitting the ground floor. "This way," Mitchell hissed, pulling Mrs. Baek toward the delivery-only zone. Her matte black V-Power e-bike sat there, looking like a stealth fighter among commuter cars. It was designed for heavy cargo, but she'd never tested it with a human passenger. She flipped the kickstand and hopped on, the digital display glowing a sharp, electric blue. "Get on the back, hold my waist and don't let go," Mitchell commanded. Mrs. Baek didn't hesitate. She climbed onto the extended rear rack, her small hands locking around Mitchell's torso like a vice. Just as Mitchell kicked the motor into turbo mode, a black SUV screeched around the corner, its tires screaming against the polished concrete. Lieutenant Park leaned out of the passenger window, his face contorted with rage. He didn't fire, not yet. He wanted the Queen alive to use as leverage. Mitchell slammed the throttle. The e-bike surged forward with a silent, powerful hum. Instead of heading for the main exit, where the security gates would be locked, she veered toward the loading dock's pedestrian ramp, a narrow, steep incline blocked by steel bollards. "Hold on!" The bike cleared the bollards with an inch to spare. The SUV slammed its brakes, unable to follow through the narrow gap. Mitchell burst out into the cool night air of the city, but she knew the reprieve was temporary. She didn't take the main boulevards. She dove into the gray veins, the network of service alleys, narrow shortcuts, and one-way streets she had memorized over 1,000 shifts. The SUV reappeared 2 blocks away, roaring down a parallel street, trying to cut her off. Mitchell took a sharp right into a crowded night market. The smell of grilled meat and the roar of the crowd swallowed them. She wove through the stalls, the e-bike nimble enough to dodge tourists and vendors. "They're coming back," Mrs. Baek shouted over the wind. 2 motorcycles, light and fast, had split off from Park's team. They were gaining. Mitchell saw a construction site ahead, a massive trench for a new subway line with only a narrow wooden footbridge crossing it. "Mitchell!" Mrs. Baek yelled, seeing the drop. Mitchell didn't slow down. She calculated the distance, gripped the handlebars, and hit the wooden planks at 30 miles per hour. The bridge groaned and flexed, but the bike stayed true. Behind them, the motorcycles had to slow down to a crawl to navigate the unstable wood. Mitchell checked her GPS. She wasn't heading for a police station. Park had friends there. She was heading for the logistics district, a maze of shipping containers and warehouses where Seung-min's most loyal soldiers were stationed. As she rounded the final corner, her battery indicator flashed red. The bike was dying. Behind her, the SUVs had found the main road and were closing in, their headlights blinding in her rearview mirror. "Just a little further," Mitchell whispered, her muscles screaming. "I have one more delivery to make." She saw the gates of the Iron Pine warehouse. She didn't have a key, so she did the only thing she could. She drove straight toward the heavy iron doors and leaned on the horn, a rhythmic, coded signal she'd heard the Mafia drivers use. The warehouse gates swung open just as the e-bike's motor gave a final, pathetic whine and died. Mitchell skidded to a halt, her legs shaking so violently she could barely keep the bike upright. Seung-min's loyalists, men who had survived the ambush at the docks, swarmed out, their weapons drawn. When they saw the special courier and the chairman's mother, a stunned silence fell over the yard. Mitchell felt the weight on her back shift. Mrs. Baek's grip loosened, her hands sliding off Mitchell's waist. "Ma'am?" Mitchell spun around, catching the older woman before she hit the concrete. Mrs. Baek's face was deathly pale, her breathing shallow. The adrenaline had run out. She had survived the laundry chute, the stairs, and the high-speed chase through the night market, but her heart was finally demanding the price. "Get a medic, now!" Mitchell screamed, her nursing training taking over. She laid Mrs. Baek flat on the ground, checking her pulse with practiced fingers. "Clear a path! She's in shock!" A black sedan roared into the yard, fishtailing to a stop. Seung-min burst out of the car. He was disheveled, his sleeve torn and stained with blood. He had fought his way out of the docks. He froze at the sight of Mitchell kneeling over his mother. "She's alive," Mitchell gasped, not looking up as she performed a sternal rub to keep the woman conscious. "But she needs a hospital. Your penthouse is compromised. Park is behind this." Seung-min looked at Mitchell, really looked at her. He saw the grease on her forehead, the torn hoodie, and the sheer, exhausted courage in her eyes. He nodded once to his men. "Secure the perimeter. Bring the private physician here. No one leaves." 1 week later. The city was quiet, though the news was full of reports about a corporate restructuring at Iron Pine Logistics and the mysterious disappearance of several high-level executives. Mitchell sat on a bench outside the city's top nursing college. She held a fresh, brand-name EpiPen in her hand, turning it over. A shadow fell over her. Seung-min stood there, dressed in a sharp black suit, looking once again like a man who owned the world. "My mother is awake," he said. "She's asking for spicy rice cakes. The doctors are horrified." Mitchell let out a small, tired laugh. "She's the toughest person I've ever met." Seung-min sat down next to her. He handed her a simple white envelope. Mitchell started to hand it back, but he stopped her. "It isn't money. It's a deed. My mother bought the building where you live. She says the landlord was a rat who didn't fix your heater. You own your apartment now. And the scholarship for your nursing degree, it's been endowed in your mother's name." Mitchell looked at the envelope. For the first time in her life, she didn't have to worry about the next delivery or the next bill. "Why do all this?" she asked. "I saved her twice, sure, but you could have just said thank you." Seung-min looked toward the horizon. "In my world, everyone wants something from me. My men want power. My enemies want my head. You are the only person who saved the thing I love most and asked for absolutely nothing." He stood up to leave, pausing for a moment. "The bike is yours to keep. But Mitchell, if you ever decide you're tired of nursing, I could use a head of logistics who knows how to move through this city better than the police." Mitchell watched him walk toward his car. She looked at the nursing school behind her and the city in front of her. She wasn't just a delivery girl anymore. She was the girl who had survived the Iron Pine, and she knew that wherever she went, she would never have to ride alone again. This story reminds us that power isn't something you're born into, and it isn't measured by money, titles, or fear. Real power is quieter. It's the courage to make the right choice when no one is watching, and the empathy to save a stranger, even when it puts your own life at risk. She didn't know who the woman in that alley was. She didn't know there was an empire watching from the shadows. She only knew someone was dying, and she chose not to walk away. And in a city ruled by violence and debt, that single choice changed everything. Sometimes fate doesn't ask if you're ready. Sometimes it just waits to see if you're brave enough to act, and then it follows you home. If watching a delivery rider stand her ground in a world ruled by power and fear gave you chills, make sure to like the video and subscribe. You're not just watching a story, you're stepping into a world where choices have consequences. Comment loyalty below if you believe she made the right decision by staying when walking away would have been easier. But don't mistake protection for peace. Saving a life doesn't erase enemies, it creates them. The night in that alley didn't go unnoticed. Someone was supposed to die. Someone lost face. And in Seoul's underworld, blood debts don't disappear, they wait. Seung-min may control the city, but there are forces even he doesn't fully command, and the closer she stands to him, the more dangerous her shadow becomes. Next time, loyalty will be tested, protection will come at a price, and survival will demand more than courage. This isn't a fairy tale. This is the beginning of a war. Turn on notifications so you don't miss part 2, because in Seoul, the shadows remember everything.